Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. Thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share if you find this content helpful. Today, you will learn about chapters 4 and 5 from the book called The True Third Secret of Fatima Revealed. This is the book by Pastor Mello. On the screen here, we have a symbol, which is the symbol of the 12 tribes of the Congo nation. The tribes are called Mavila. That's the tribes, the name for tribes. Those tribes are the true Isolele, and in the middle of the symbol, you have the Lion of Judah. So today we'll be talking about chapters 4 and 5. Let me go right into it. So right at the beginning of this chapter, you will see this statement here. Are the 12 tribes of Isolele really lost? That is the question that is asked. And then there are these three scriptures that are quoted. The point of all these three scriptures is to show that these tribes are not really lost. We just didn't know where they are, or some people chose to tell us that they're lost. But from Genesis in the Old Testament to Acts in the New Testament and Revelation at the end of the New Testament, throughout scriptures, we see the 12 tribes being identified as to who they are. So I'll read this. All these are the tribes of Israel, and this is what their father spoke unto them and blessed them. Everyone according to his blessing, he blessed them. That's in the book of Genesis. And in Acts, Paul says, and now I stand and am judged for the hope of the promise made of Tatanzambi unto our fathers, unto which promise our 12 tribes, instantly serving Tatanzambi day and night, hope to come. And in Revelation, John says, and I had the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Isolele. That 144,000 are from the tribes of the children of Isolele. We are not lost. We may be mentally, some of us, but we are not lost as a people. We still exist, and will still exist even during the end times, like today. So, in chapter 4, begins with that question, are the 12 tribes of Isolele really lost? And then Pastor Mello goes through 9 chapters, you can say, or sub-chapters, where he explains that we are not really lost. What does he talk about? He talks about the Great Tribulation, how we were deported, our ancestors were deported to Assyria of the 10 northern tribes. If you've read the book, you'll see that he's alluding to Assyria being in the Middle East, or the so-called Middle East, Arabia. I don't agree with that. I think Assyria is in Northern Africa, but that's a discussion we can have. But then we also see that those people called Assyrians are going to convert to Judaism. These people were both black people, and then there were others who were white people, so to speak, who converted to Judaism. And when they converted to Judaism, they adopted the name Jew. So they're changing, allegedly, their name to Jews, yet they're not of the Judaic bloodline. They're just converts. So now we have 2 types of Jewish people. The original people by bloodline, and then we have those who are converts, and they're living side by side. In fact, at the time of Jesus, Pastor Mello explains in this book that you had the converts and the bloodline Jews. And the term Jews had started being used as if it was a synonym for the term Isolele or Israel. which is what we see happening today. When people say the name Jews, people think we're talking about all of Israel. No, that's incorrect. But this didn't start today, it started before that. Then he explained it started even by the time of Christ, here 2,000 years ago. That's why Christ quoted Revelation 2:9 and 3:9, where he talks about those who say they are Jews, but they're not. They were in his midst. It's nothing new. Okay, then he talks about the deportation of Judah and Benjamin. We've read about some of this stuff in the book of Maccabees and the book of Tobit. Same story. He's just repeating and saying this was happening. They were being moved out of the land, and that was part of the separation. Now, most people tend to think that, myself included, I was of the mindset that, the 10 northern tribes were the ones who were scattered abroad, and then the two tribes of Judah and Benjamin were left. Those were the southern tribes. And then we think of those 10 tribes as the lost tribes. Pastor Mello properly debunks that myth that has been propagated by a large part of Christendom today. So that didn't actually happen. There were two separate kingdoms, northern and southern, but it doesn't mean that only the top were scattered abroad and the rest, the two, were left. No, all of them were scattered abroad, and all of them had a remnant also left in the land. All right, then it talks about Isaiah and the apostles. The return of the 12 tribes to their land, their promised land. This is where he's talking about how they came back to Africa. That's a subject for discussion. Jesus, the apostles, and the 12 tribes, or Isaiah, how they migrated to Africa, settlement of the 12 tribes in Africa, and then the biggest sign, the biggest elephant in the room in this awakening, slavery. That is a sign of who these 12 tribes really are. So in the 400 years of slavery, if the 400 years of slavery that are mentioned in Genesis did not occur in Egypt. We know it didn't happen when the Isolele went into Egypt. When did it happen? Did it happen when they were deported to Assyria? No, it wasn't 400 years. Did it happen when they were sent or exiled in Babylon? No, it didn't happen in Babylon. It was not 400 years. Did it happen during the scattering and destruction of the temple in 70 AD or thereabout? No, it wasn't that 400. Then that means there's only one alternative, and that is the punishment of 400 years of slavery that happened to the true diaspora of Isolele, whether you're talking about the East African trade that went on, slave trade that went on for almost 1,200 years, between like the 8th century until like the early 20th century, and still going on a little bit here and there today. Or you could be talking about the very common transatlantic slave trade, but it does correspond to these latter events where we see the scattering and enslavement of Isolele all around the world. Here are some images just to refresh our minds on this. Might not be very clear there, but this is an image that is showing slaves who have been rescued from an Arab dhow, or dhow, that's a ship or a boat. And this is in Zanzibar. Zanzibar is off the east coast of Africa. Notice how this image has a lot of children. Okay. And the person who I give credit to here is a gentleman called Christopher Joshua Bent. I pulled this out of his Instagram page, and he was doing this as a part of a project where he thanked the Northwestern University Library for granting access to these images. So these are Africans, East Africans, or at least people captured on the East African coast, and they were being sold off to slavery, to the Arabian lands, to India, and many other places. Even kids. There's also a very nice website here called 400 Years of Inequality. The web page is in there. It's at 400 years of inequality.org. I encourage anyone who wants to see more of this. Oops, sorry, got that wrong. I encourage anyone who wants to look at this in depth, go to 400yearsofinequality.org. You will see lots of images, lots and lots of images. And the common thing you'll see is that these images of slavery are with Black people. So when it comes to the people in the Bible, in the scriptures, who experienced slavery, there's no question who it is. It's Black people. And that is the revealing sign that Isolele is not lost. Nearly 12.5 million ancestors of Black Americans were shipped as slaves from Western Africa to the Americas, North, South America, both North and South America and Latin America. The Middle Passage, typically an 8 to 12-week voyage across the Atlantic, resulted in the death of nearly 2 million of the Africans who were transported in chains. The most accurate calculation I got was 15%. 15% of the people who were ferried across the Atlantic died. Only Blacks experienced this. Let no one else try and take credit for what our ancestors went through. It is not even a laughing matter, and we have to tell them that very, very soberly. Okay, so let me move on to chapter 5. That is a summary of chapter 4. We can get into detail in the discussion. What is chapter 5 talking about? So here Pastor Mello tells us about the kingdom of Congo in totality, which is also called Isolele. Okay, the word Isolele, I'll tell you what it means. But he also talks about the people who speak the same language in the Bible, in the scriptures. And he gives us some examples, 3 examples, which I'll get into very briefly. And then he even goes on to show how Kikongo as a language is actually what is the language that and the people that the scriptures are talking about. Now, for those of you who might not know this, but when you talk to most Bantu people, and when I say most, I'm talking 99%, especially on the continent, and you ask them where they come from, they will tell you they come from Congo. And Congo is a big region in Central Africa. It's not just the country of DRC Congo or Congo Central African Republic. It's that region in the middle of Africa. Why is it that all the Bantus point to Congo as their root? It's because that's the oral history. That's where the language, that's what the oral history says. That's where their language points to. That's where their traditions point to. And that's where the scriptures also point to, is what Pastor Mello is showing here. So he explains about how counting in Kikongo is a recital of Genesis. I wouldn't get into that today. And he also talks about the 10 things that were created, or the 10 creation events, the Decalogue, in the Most High's first 10 words, and how those pretty much play out literally from the Congo language. So let me get into details about these 3. First of all, starting with Isolele, actually, number 1. So if you read the book, you'll realize that Isolele is the word that means I have chosen you. And this is what was mistranslated or forged to become Israel. It should be Isolele. If you ask the people who say they are the Jews what Israel means, they will tell you the scripture that says he fought with God and prevailed. But that doesn't make sense. That doesn't even translate in their Hebrew, so to speak. The word Izolele, but with a Z or a Z instead of S, also means I have loved you. And the scripture that is quoted in the book here talks about him loving us and choosing us. So the word was isolele. Now, in the Congo language, the word to pray is samba, just like we have samba for the Sabbath day. Number 7 is samboadi. So the language contains the words for Sabbath, prayer, and the seventh, number 7. That's not coincidence. In 1886, there was a request by the so-called white Jewish community, this is 1886, for territory in Angola so that they could establish a Jewish state of Israel. Fortunately, it was denied or rejected in 1912. The Portuguese said, no. If you read a bit of history, you'll also see that at the same period, around 1908 to around 1920, the same people tried to request for territory in East Africa between Kenya and Uganda. It's called the Uganda Scheme. Fortunately, that didn't work out, and they ended up establishing the state where it is today in 1948. The question is, why did they try and establish a Jewish state within Africa? It's an indication that they knew that the tribes were actually in Africa, especially in Angola. That was the first place they tried to establish the state. The Mavila, the 12 tribes we just looked at before, were there, no doubt. The people who speak the Bible, the Holy Book, did not reach Africa through the 15th century missionaries. Okay? So this book, this language did not reach Africa, or the Congolese people did not arrive in Africa in the 15th century when the missionaries came. Neither the people nor the language. Congo language itself already had the stories of the scriptures, the culture of the scriptures, and the people themselves. So Kikongo is undoubtedly Hebraic. The clues are many. For example, I will jump here and talk about these 3 words here in number 3, the Congo language. The word passio in Latin means suffering and pain. That word is derived from this first word, mpasi. Mpasi is the word in Kikongo that comes from the word mpati, with a T as in tango. And mpati, with a T as in tango, designates the total of 24 ribs in the human body. So, the Latin people, they looked at Genesis and they saw that when a rib was removed from the side of Adam, he had pain, he had suffering. And they borrowed from the word from the Kikongo, which is mpati, to change that to passio. So that now they use the word passion, which is derived from passio. They use it to describe the passion of Christ. You know, the whole events from the Garden of Gethsemane until when they hung him on a tree. So from the word mpasi here, the French, the English, they derive the word passion. The Spanish, pasión, same word. Portuguese, I don't know how to say it, but it's something like paixão. They're using that and changing it into their European languages to cover up what is really going on. Second word here is nkento, nkento. This means wife. If I said my wife, I would say nkento ame, wife my. Now, in what is called Meloitic, you take away what they call the nasals, the N or the M, and you're left with just the consonants. In this case, you'd have KT. So Nkento or wife could be written as KT. Interestingly, if you look at the word for male or man or a male child, it's the reverse of KT. It's Toko, Toko. And in Meloitic, that is written as TK. That brings us to what we're talking about here, the third secret of Fatima. And we'll get into detail on that, especially in the next chapter. Let me talk about Muntu. Muntu, in across many Bantu languages, it will be a variation of this. It will be Mundu, Muntu, Mutu, and so on and so forth. But Muntu means mankind, and it derives from the last part, which is NTU, Ntu. Ntu means the head. Literally, Mu means in or into. And if Ntu means the head, then Muntu means in the head. So mankind is in the head of Ntu, whoever the head is, which is, of course, Tatanzambe. All right. Now, I will not go into the details of chapter 4 here, or section 4 and 5 here, but we can discuss that a lot more during the discussion. And with that, let's get into some discussion. Thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share if you find this content helpful.